Hi folks, welcome back to We the People. I'm Dave Gallus, your host. This week's going to be a little bit different. Now, we can argue about politics forever, but we're going to take a break and we're going to do some science today. Now, I have a special guest here. His name's Joe Fuller. He's lived in Las Cruces since 1963. He has a degree in mathematics. He was a civil servant with the U.S. Army at White Sands for 37 years, and he's retired. He designs, tests, and he's written reports on performance of Army missile weapon systems. Now, you know, it's funny, when you talk to people and you say, well, this isn't rocket science, meaning that you don't have to be a genius to understand this. Well, this is rocket science, and we have a real genius here who is a rocket scientist. So, Joe Fuller, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave.
So we're going to talk about deep geothermal energy today, but we're going to start with the background of what is geothermal energy. So, Joe, could you tell us what is geothermal energy?
Geothermal energy is energy from deep within the Earth that has reached the Earth's surface. Typical example of that would be Yellowstone Park. Places in the world where surface geothermal energy is used to produce electricity would be Iceland, which is a volcano that's come above the surface of the Earth. The big island of Hawaii, which is also a volcano. The geyser fields north of San Francisco in California, where you have hot water and steam coming above the Earth. All this surface geothermal energy produces very cheap electricity.
Okay, well, I know where the locations are close to the surface of the Earth, but where actually does this heat come from, this geothermal energy in the form of heat?
Well, millions of years ago, when the Earth was being formed, a very few of the atoms that went into the Earth, along with the 100 other types of atoms, were a few radioactive atoms. Okay. Now, when these atoms decay, they generate heat. Very, very little heat. But over millions of years, it builds up, and the center of the Earth is liquid. And this liquid extends all the way to the Earth's crust, which is about 25 miles thick on the continents, less under the oceans. Underneath the continents is the mantle. That's the boundary between the continents and the magma. Now, magma, when it breaks the surface of the Earth, is called lava, and it produces volcanoes. It's extremely hot. To get the energy, you don't have to go down 25 miles. The rocks, 5 miles deep on average, are hot enough to produce all the electricity you want.
So we talked about the surface geothermal energy, like you said, in the Iceland and the north of San Francisco, I think, the fields there. But what is deep geothermal energy?
Well, deep geothermal energy is heat that hasn't made it to the surface.
Okay.
Down at the magma, it's extremely hot, too hot to use. But halfway up or less through a continent, the heat is slowly coming to the surface. The rocks 5 miles deep are plenty hot to produce energy.
So with this deep geothermal energy, and I believe in Iceland and the other fields that you mentioned where it's close to the surface, they use this to produce electricity.
That is correct.
And it's cheap because
That's
it's on
correct.
the surface. So I imagine deeper it's going to cost more to do. But, so we're talking about producing energy.
Yeah.
And I can't think of anything cleaner than that. You're just getting heat. But what are the advantages of this deep geothermal energy as opposed to other forms of energy?
Well, the number one advantage is its abundance. There's a huge amount of it. They estimate that 1% of the energy that is 5 miles down could power this country for 100 years.
Holy smoke.
Now, the other advantage is that it is reliable. It's not affected by weather. It's totally self-sufficient.
So you don't have, when the wind stops, you don't have to worry about your wind generators not powering and not giving you any power. When the sun's not shining at nighttime, you don't have to worry about that. It's constant.
Very true.
Okay.
Very true.
Okay.
Another advantage is it produces no waste.
No waste.
There is no ash from burning of coal. There is no radioactive waste like with nuclear generators. There is absolutely no waste at all. Another advantage is the fact that it has no carbon footprint.
Now, what does carbon footprint mean?
Carbon footprint is the production of CO2 gas when you burn coal.
Okay.
Or when you burn diesel fuel.
Okay.
Or a little bit when you burn natural gas.
Okay.
This carbon dioxide is your carbon footprint because carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that causes warming.
Okay.
But deep geothermal has none of that. No emissions of any kind.
Sounds like a good advantage.
Oh, it is. Another advantage is that it doesn't require any fuel.
That's right. The Earth's providing the fuel.
The Earth's
right?
providing the fuel. Another advantage is that it is not a blight on the landscape.
Okay.
Unlike a windmill, huge numbers of them, they look horrible.
And they kill animals.
And they kill birds.
And I just saw an article where you saw the windmills that were leaking oil into the environment from the motors, I guess. They had to be repaired. And I understand that windmills also, it hurts the environment when they're producing the products for the windmills. Solar is the same, and then you have to get rid of the solar panels, and that's landfill problems right there. So this seems like a good idea.
Well, the deep geothermal, the surface footprint is very small.
Okay.
Now, another advantage is you can locate it just about anywhere.
Okay.
It doesn't matter what part of the country you are. You go down, you're going to find the bottom of the continent.
Well, that's true.
So there's heat everywhere underneath the earth.
Okay.
So you can locate it anywhere. And now that is an advantage that you don't need long transmission lines.
Ah.
You only need enough transmission lines to balance the load between stations when one place has a high load and another person has a low load.
Okay.
But you don't have to have long lines to carry huge amounts of electricity.
So like you said, these can be placed anywhere, basically.
They can be placed anywhere.
I mean, I'm sure there's restrictions, but, well, so what are the disadvantages? Did you get all the advantages?
Yeah.
All right, well, what are the disadvantages?
Well, the first one is cost. Current technology would produce deep geothermal energy about 1.5 to 2 times the cost of producing energy with coal or oil or natural gas. It's comparable to wind or solar, but it doesn't have any subsidy, so it can't compete there. The other disadvantage, and it's not really a disadvantage, is earthquakes. There is a claim that it produces earthquakes, and this was a result of a facility in Europe that was built over a fault line.
Oh.
And when they drilled down, they created earthquakes. So deep geothermal is getting a bad rap.
Okay.
It does produce microquakes, just like fracking from the oil industry does. But these are not a problem.
Now, I've talked to a friend and done some research after talking to him, and what he says is when normal earthquakes occur, when you have two plates, that one subduction, it go one over the other, and you'll have this movement of the plates where they jerk, where they build up so much pressure that they move and move quite a distance. But with the fracking, in oil fracking, where they use a slurry of, I believe it's saline, surfactant, which is a liquid for lubrication, and also sand. So when they fracture the earth, this sand actually holds the fracture apart so the oil can flow, or whatever they're moving through there can flow. But what it also acts as is a lubricant to where it allows it to slide smoothly. So you may have earthquakes, but they're very minor, micro-earthquakes.
Micro-earthquakes.
So it's actually an advantage in fracking if you're using that process that I'm talking about. So, you know, I don't know that the science is in on whether it's good or bad, but like you said, the oil fracking, although people build it up to be this tremendous problem with earthquakes, it's not really that.
It's not really a problem.
Okay. Well, and I'm thinking of, okay, like I said, the alternatives to solar and wind, to me, they're not cost effective. And like you said, they are subsidized by the government. If you have a business that can stand on its own and you don't need any government subsidy, to me, that's a real business. And I think if a wise person or a wise company or a wise government would actually think about, okay, we are going to produce solar energy, we are going to produce wind energy, we are going to produce all the natural that we have as far as oil, gas, coal, but take some of that money and put it into research and development in something like this, deep geothermal energy. So to me, it sounds like it could very well work if you have the right people in legislation that want to listen to this. But I imagine that the different people that are going to be against it, who would be against this?
Well, the people that are against it, it's an unusual mix. You've got tremendous amount of lobbyists in Washington and who are for the green energy, wind and solar, hydroelectric, nuclear. And you've got a huge amount of lobbyists in Washington who are for coal, oil, natural gas, and they fight each other generally.
Sure.
But on deep geothermal, they're all aligned together because deep geothermal has the potential to put them all out of business.
Well, to me, I think, again, a wise person or a wise government would say, this is going to be real at some point in the future. Why not jump on board now, use some money for research and development, and transition into deep geothermal?
Because you got a ton of lobbyists who are fighting it and nobody fighting for it.
Well, to me, the lobbyists and the bureaucrats are what run our country, which is a big mistake. They call them the, quote, experts, and some of the the bureaucrats are experts in their field, but still it should be our legislature that makes the decisions based on truthful expert information. So I hear you. Well, now tell me, what is the size footprint, do you know, of these surface geothermal energy plants?
Well, you want to keep it all rather compact so that you don't have a lot of heat loss due to moving the fluids around. So your two wells at the surface and the generators should all be close to each other. I would say a large city block would cover everything.
Holy smoke. And I see these wind turbine fields and I see solar fields that are, as far as the eye can see, maybe 10 miles square. And I've also heard too, and I think I've seen in Iceland, where they had the geothermal plant and there was a forest all around it. So you're not impacting the environment. It's only the surface that's really affected. Everything else is underground?
That's right. Small surface footprint, a very big footprint underground.
Right. And then, what would you say? An inexhaustible, as long as our planet lasts, inexhaustible source of energy.
True, because right now the limit is about 5 miles where it gets too hot to drill. In 100 years, we'll probably have better technology and we can go deeper, and there's a lot more energy down there.
Well, and I think you were telling me before the show that if you are reducing the amount of temperature that you want, you're getting lower, you're using up that heat, you just drill a little bit deeper, right?
Right.
Until you get to the hotter spot. Well, it sounds like a good deal to me.
Oh, it is.
Well, can you tell me, just explain how we're going to get this out of the ground? Now, you have a graph, I think, that you're going to show us, but we're going to wait till after the break. Right now, we've already come to the point where, okay, this is a good, a viable possibility in the future for energy, and it can rival just about anything else. But when we come back from the break, you could tell us how it's going to happen graphically. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be back in a couple minutes after some advertising, and we'll find out just how it is on paper.
Granite is here. We'll come to you to customize your kitchen and bathroom with beautiful countertops and cabinets. Find out more at horizongranite.com. Call us at 575-650-3180.
Horizon Granite is here.
It's here.
Make yourself a beautiful home.
Hi, I'm Ray Bamberg with Here on Earth. I would like to invite you for a free hearing evaluation to our office. We've been here in southern New Mexico for 34 years helping people hear better.
They've stormed beaches and freed countries. They've raised our flag and our hope. They've been called leathernecks. They've been called devil dogs. But above all, they're called Marines.
Hi folks, welcome back to We the People. I'm Dave Gallus, your guest, and we have a special, I'm the host, excuse me, but maybe I'm a guest today too, because I'm learning. We have a special guest, Joe Fuller, who is a real rocket scientist. You hear about, oh, this isn't rocket science. This is rocket science. Joe has been in the field for 37 years at White Sands. So we were talking about deep geothermal energy. We understand that it could work as a good energy source. Might have to do some playing with the numbers as far as cost effectiveness, but heck, the federal government's subsidizing the wind and solar. Why not geothermal? But there's politics involved. But Joe's going to explain to us now about how do we recover this from the earth. So Joe, you're on.
Well, I'm going to illustrate how we recover the energy deep within the earth, and it costs money, and that's why it's called deep geothermal. The first thing you need to do is you drill down until you get to rock that is too hot to drill any further. When the rock gets so hot that you can't cool your drilling bit, then you have to stop because it's impractical to try to go deeper. After you get down that deep, you run fluid down that hole and pressurize it so it starts fracturing the earth at that deep level. Now you don't care which direction the fracture goes because you're at the middle of a fault-free zone, so you just pressurize it and track where it goes with seismic instrumentation.
So Joe, the only thing that you really need to be concerned about in the initial stages of finding the site is you don't want a fault line around it. So
that is the primary concern. Another thing you would look for, if you can do an infrared survey, you might want to pick up a hot spot because you know that the energy is closer to the surface. But the primary thing is to have no faults so that there's no earthquakes.
And a little background too is the surface of the earth is in layers, horizontal layers, correct?
Yes.
So when you're fracking, you're actually pressurizing in a horizontal layer.
That's right. When you pressurize for fracking, it'll move horizontally.
Okay.
Now, when you get 5 miles away from the first drill hole, you stop because that gives you a 5-mile long frac zone. Then you drill another hole at an angle to intercept the end of the fracture zone. Then you have a loop that allows you to run fluid down and back up. Now that fluid, when it goes through the fracking zone, gets very, very hot. It develops very high pressure. Over here at high temperature and high pressure, if there's no pressure up here, it pumps automatically. You don't have to pump it out of there. After you get it to the surface, you run it through a generator, produce electricity, and run it out to you and I. But this loop is how you get that deep heat to the surface so you can use it. Now, the only thing about this is it costs money. That's why deep geothermal costs more money than the surface geothermal electricity that is produced. But right now, with existing oil technology, the cost is about 1.5 to 2 times the cost of producing electricity with coal or oil or natural gas.
Joe, do you know what the cost of solar and wind is compared to oil and gas?
Considerably higher, because that's why they have to subsidize it.
Right. So I would think it's much more than 2 times, but
Probably about the same as,
okay.
I think deep geothermal is probably about the same cost as solar or wind.
Okay, and to clarify something, you said that when you have a footprint, say this is 10 miles square, when you set it, you will go out 5 miles in any direction?
Right, you drill from the center.
So you don't know where it's going to go.
You don't know where it's
So
gonna go.
having that 10-mile footprint gives you 5 miles from the center point.
Right,
I got you. Okay, and it's a very small area on the surface. Everything's done underground.
right.
Okay,
Right, everything
okay.
is underground. This area up here is about a city block.
Wow.
Very small.
Wow.
Down here it's 5 miles wide.
And when you, okay, well, that sounds good. Well, when you talk about generation, you're talking about a generator that'll make electricity. So it converts this superheated, is it a liquid? Is it water? What is it?
It's typically water, but it's got a lot of dissolved rock in it. The thing that's important is what you put down this pipe across here and back up is the same thing that comes up. You want your fluid to be in geological balance with the earth down here so that you don't dissolve the rock and short circuit your system.
So you want the same rocks going down that came out. You want the same chemistry.
Same chemistry
I got
in the water.
I got you.
But going down, it's not cool, it's still hot, because you can't recover all the heat, because that gets too expensive. You just recover as much of the heat as you can economically, and then run it back down.
Well, you can't run this rock, pulverized rock through a generator. It would chew it up. So
No,
So-
you need a heat exchanger.
Okay.
And if you don't use a heat exchanger, you have to clean this up before you run it through the generators, and then you have to dirty it up before you run it back down.
So a heat exchanger is the way to go.
Heat exchanger is the way to go.
And they've used that. They use them on ships, I know. They use them many, many places. So the technology is there for the heat exchangers, I would think.
Well, the heat exchanger here is extremely high temperature, extremely high pressure, and I think some technological advances have to be made before that will work like it needs to work.
Okay. Well, you know, I wonder, where is the best place to do geothermal in the United States?
Well, New Mexico is one of those places.
Well, aren't we lucky?
The other is the Great Basin between the Rocky Mountains and the Cascade Mountains at the Pacific Ocean. We're talking Nevada, Utah, Wyoming.
But why is New Mexico so good?
Well, let me finish it
Okay.
telling you why those areas are good. The Rocky Mountains are moving east, and the Cascades are moving west, and they're stretching the continent, and it's getting thin.
Ah.
Now, southern New Mexico and the Rio Grande Valley are prime places where the continent is thinner, not because of any stretching, but because of recent volcanic activity.
Oh.
Has thinned out the bottom of the continent in this area. And so the geothermal heat is closer to the surface where it's cheaper to get to it. Now, the fact that the volcanic activity has been present can be seen up at the Valley of Fires recreation area just west of Carrizozo on the highway to Socorro.
Ah, okay.
And we know it's recent geological because there's a big lava flow there, and it hasn't weathered away yet.
Wow. Okay. That's a good indicator.
Yeah.
Well, okay. what technological advances are needed for us to progress and move into deep geothermal?
Well, improvements in seismic instrumentation would be useful because you have to track where your fracking zone is gone so you can drill into it at its outer end.
Right.
Now, the way you do this is you track the microquakes.
Ah, okay, okay.
But it'll be useful if we had, rather than surface instrumentation, downhole instrumentation, because that would give us better data because we're getting away from the surface clutter.
Okay.
Another thing that would be nice would be if we had a larger pipe than the oil pipe that's being used.
Right.
Because you could get more fluid down, more fluid up, and move more energy. Another thing that would be nice would be a large diameter submersible high temperature, high pressure pump. Now they have these already for the oil industry, but they're small diameter. They fit the oil pipes.
Well, it doesn't seem like it's undoable. It's just
No, it's just a matter of normal, natural progression.
Right, sure, okay.
Now, another thing that we need is development in high temperature, high pressure heat exchangers.
Yeah, we were talking about the heat exchangers, yeah.
And we need to develop stage generation so that we can recover more of the heat. If you have a generator, it has a heat range. Another generator has a different heat range. A third generator could have another heat range.
And the generator is what converts the heat energy to electrical energy.
To electrical energy.
Okay.
It's an electrical generator.
Okay, got you. Okay, but stages is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, we got about 1 minute left on the show. So, what kind of research and development is currently being done?
Not very much.
Yeah.
The little bit that is being done by private enterprise. We talked earlier about how all the lobbyists in Washington are against it, and so there's very, very little federal money going into it.
Well, I would say, Joe, that maybe this show is the seed to help people understand the possibilities of it, and when they hear the word deep geothermal or geothermal at all, they might say, hey, I heard about that. Let's go back to that show with Joe Fuller, the rocket scientist, and find out what the skinny is. So, well, Joe, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show. Folks, we'll be back next week, and I don't know what the subject is going to be, but I'm going to move a little bit away from politics and get into some science as we move along. So, Joe Fuller, rocket scientist, thank you so much for deep geothermal energy, and hopefully someday we'll be using it. We'll see you next week.